go ahead and build a pipeline, there will be nothing to fill it unless we change some of these other regulations that are hampering production.
A member of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute went on Bloomberg News claiming that Churchill, Manitoba was not a good choice for an LNG pipeline. She felt that we should perhaps be looking into New Brunswick or maybe even Newfoundland. She is, of course, incorrect. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. A fellow from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute was on Bloomberg News claiming that she doesn't believe that Churchill is a good example or a good place to be putting an LNG in a deep water port. She felt that there were other choices inside of Canada that would be better suited, but not so much for Western natural gas, but for other sources of natural gas that Canada has to offer. I'll let you hear some of it and then I'll show you how she's completely incorrect.
Yeah, so we're all wondering what the Prime Minister is thinking. We're talking about a port in Churchill, and of course there is a port in Churchill. There's been a port in Churchill for about 100 years. It's never been particularly busy, and it's never attracted a lot of shippers. And the main reason for that is because it's a seasonal port. So obviously it's towards the Canadian Arctic, at the very tip of Manitoba in the Hudson Bay. It's frozen over for about 8 months. The shipping season is 3 to 4 months. And so it hasn't been that attractive for shippers to invest in the infrastructure to do it. Now, in the last 7 years, we have invested about $500 million into refurbishing Churchill for things like grains and minerals. Still not a lot moving through there. And now we're talking about using it for LNG. So we'll see if LNG has a better chance, but my analysis suggests it doesn't. Yeah, so when we talk about moving to Manitoba, obviously, the expense of building a pipeline and a liquefaction facility to only get 4 or 5 months or even maximum 6 months use of it, it's not a good business case.
Okay, guys, as we get into this, let's establish a couple of things. This individual might not be speaking from the same position as I am, like as a patriot who's trying to improve the country overall, improve its health, and protect its borders. She may be simply looking at it as a dollars and cents. More accurately, she may be just trying to cast a lot of shade on it. Let's realize something. Bloomberg is the only individual who is still part of that Glasgow net zero thing that Mark Carney started. Most of everybody else has abandoned it. The last time I checked, only the owner of Bloomberg was the person that was still with them. Now, they put up this little graphic in the middle there, and she talked about how, Churchill's been there for 100 years and that it's frozen in a lot of time of the year. It's called the Hudson Bay because the fellow from England, whose name was Hudson, he found it when he was trying to find an alternative to the goods of North America, and the French had control of the St. Lawrence River. He promptly got in there, got a lot of pelts and a lot of stuff put on his boat, and couldn't get out for 3 more years. So it is absolutely frozen, and that's something to remember. Further important to remember that just on the tip of it down there is the James Bay project, which is a hydroelectric dam responsible for the electrical generation or providing electricity to probably a third of the North American continent, including places like New York, Buffalo, and Toronto. So Montreal. So let's consider the strategic importance before we start to dismiss it in the way that Miss Perrott has done. Okay, I went ahead and I sort of copied the graphic that they had put up there, and you can see that this blue part of the map is the Hudson Bay that they were talking about. The dark arrow is where Churchill is. And I'm just wanting to point out to you that string of towns that I have marked in red there. Can anybody think of what that is and why they would be like that? That's right. That's the railway, because that railway starts in Churchill and ends in the city of Winnipeg, passing through the province of Saskatchewan. If you take a closer look at the left-hand side of the map, you'll see all kinds of little lakes, all kinds of wooded area in there. There's a lot of swamps, there's a lot of lakes, there's a lot of bodies of water. And this was the only way that they could get a railway up there, was this slender line that has now been populated by how many towns? Now, when I talk to you about the magnetic levitation, it's because I'm aware of the topography that we're referring to. I understand that what we're actually needing to do is build a series of bridges, and magnetic levitations exert no downforce. So there's no reason to have to worry about any of the wear and tear that would be associated with a traditional bed and rail line. Of course, that's just another element that this Miss Perrott is overlooking when she dismisses Churchill as solid investment for Canada as a whole. I wanted to show to you that where they built the rail line in this part of the world, people started to live, and they all sort of use it as Churchill. Now, understand, this is the kind of area, this is the kind of place where most people will get around on not vehicles. They're going to have a truck, might not even have a plate on it. They're going to have a solid snowmobile. They're going to have a solid quad runner, and they will be all kinds of bush pilots. And these are the ways that they travel and get around up there because of the lack of investment and development. When you start to put in a deep water port like Churchill and you start to take it seriously, when you put an LNG liquefaction plant, when you add to that a shipbuilding because we need icebreakers, when you start to think about the enormous amounts of investment and various different businesses that are going to be springing up as a result of that, we can see that all of a sudden, this particular region of the country becomes crucial. Now, one of the reasons the port is already there is because it is designed to feed the North as much resources as it can. And I don't mean resources in the way of steel or coal or any of that kind of thing. I mean that they get a lot of drywall, they get a lot of infrastructure on boats. There's a boat that leaves the port of Montreal and it sails into Churchill, and it typically leaves in October and it won't send another one again until the spring because the port is frozen all the time. Now, we're not quite there yet. Okay, let's take another look at what Ms. Perot is saying. She doesn't see any business sense. Here we can see the top half of the world. We have Canada, we have Greenland, Iceland, Ireland is in there. I didn't put China in the shot because what matters is this little strip of water. You can see Churchill marked by the little red dot in the center. And we can see this water, which they now have come to call the Northwest Passage. Now, freight sailing out of China and into Europe, or vice versa, saves a couple of weeks if it takes the Northwest Passage, as rather than go through the Panama Canal, which is an enormous amount of time and makes people a lot more money. On top of that, Russia, who has the most icebreakers in the world, routinely sails into our waters. Dutch routinely sail into our waters because they have control of Greenland. The Chinese routinely sail into our waters. We don't have the icebreakers to allow our own little navy to go up there to have a look. So once it goes frozen, we're essentially shut out. And the Liberal government's talking about building one icebreaker between Finland and Texas. We might have it in, who knows how long they'll be telling us that there's delays. Why we don't have our own ships being manufactured, why we don't have the most number of icebreakers on Earth is a staggering thing to me. What I do understand, of course, is that those generate a lot of money. And like building them and all of the rest of that is something that Canadians need to be considering. We need to be talking about the fact that we have all the fresh water. We have water. We have the longest coastline in the world. And really, if we were to be pressed right now, it would be one frigate and about 19 kayaks. And that would be the entire breadth and width of our Navy. It's really not that strong at all when you consider the amount of ocean that we have, when you consider the amount of open water that we have, and when you consider the amount of connected internal waters that we have. Before I get back to Miss Perot and her foolishness, realize that if it's frozen up there, then we need to put the pipeline above ground, which means we can build it very rapidly. You can get there really quickly because of the frozen ground. It doesn't need to be buried in there. And with all that water, we don't have to worry about going, under it or around it. It's simply frozen. You've all seen ice road truckers. And now we can get that LNG over there. And when we get it to turn it into a liquid, we can do so at much cheaper and it will sustain much better because it's always cold there. So the cold helps keep it in liquid state. So now we have an LNG providing gas to these ships so they can sail them into Europe in never-ending supply or requirement that they have. We can be shipyards to be building icebreakers to keep all the traffic moving, not just the LNG, but the supply ships that are bringing in supplies for not only Churchill, but moving it across the top of the Northwest Passage, which for a small fee, we will sail in front of you and keep the waterway open for your usage. If you simply rent one of our icebreakers, stop in Newfoundland, we'll set you up. All because we want to put an LNG in there. Not just an LNG, though. You can see how it becomes now a strategic position. It's better to look at it as more like a CFB Churchill or something like that, because we can provide strategic defense of the James Bay project. We can start to build the icebreakers, which are protecting the longest coastline in the world, most of which is frozen most of the year. We have ships coming in for LNG. We have moved a lot of our population off the coast with the border with the United States, and we're starting to spread it out across the top half of the planet. We built another section between Whitehorse, Yellowknife, and Churchill, and all of a sudden now we have a thriving internal economy. So I'm not sure that she is looking her way through all of that. I believe that she might just be looking at the dollars and cents, and not very well, actually. It could be that she has a political slant in a certain direction.
But there is another option, and that's to produce some natural gas from the Atlantic. There's actually some very good natural gas basins in that part of the world, and maybe that would be a logical place to start looking. Newfoundland offshore has quite a bit of natural gas. New Brunswick has some natural gas. And actually Quebec has very good natural gas deposits, because what extends from that basin, the Utica, extends into Quebec. Now there have been bans on fracking in many places in that part of the world. You would maybe want to take those off. But all which to say is exporting natural gas from the Rockies is a long way to go to get to Europe. And there's some other places we should probably be looking first.
But that statement, she either exposes her political bias or a profound lack of comprehension of the situation. We have been talking about developing oil and gas out of Newfoundland for 50 years. I mean, they have been talking and talking and talking, but every time you turn around, some Liberal government is getting in the way with an environmental assessment. That's why Newfoundland has such high unemployment, because they cannot get the government to support the development of the oil and gas. Further, to say, oh, no, the New Brunswick is going to get their gas up and running. With Irving Oil in New Brunswick, and Irving imports all of his stuff, the company does all of their stuff from the Middle East, like from the Persian Gulf. So something tells me they're not going to be really allowing a domestic development to compete with them.
What I would suggest for the government, instead of subsidizing LNG through Churchill, probably at a loss, is to create conditions under which private proponents may want to export LNG, and let the private sector decide what actually makes sense from a business case. Again, the most important thing in my mind, I don't think we want governments picking and choosing winners. That seems to be what they're planning to do with the Port of Churchill. But still, we have to work on creating those conditions in which investors do want to invest, do want to build LNG terminals, and let's see what pops up. But right now, we haven't seen any improvement in the investment conditions for oil and gas. We still have an oil and gas emissions cap. We still have the same Impact Assessment Act. There's a lot of things that need to change for investors to be interested.
Well, at least she was talking sense there. Now, the regulations, there's too many laws in the way that the Liberal government crafted on purpose. They said, what can we do to stop the development of LNG? What can we do to stop the development of our natural resources? And then they proceeded to write laws to make that happen. I'm trying to get everyone to understand that Churchill as a center, as a hub, as the beginning of the wheel for civil defense, for an economic beacon in the northern part of the country, is what we have to be looking at. So that ultimately, from the humble beginnings of a LNG, we also have a shipbuilding, we also have a deep water port for shipping. From that, we spiderweb out, we create other bases, and we create other economic possibilities that will come once the infrastructure is there. If they build it, they will come, right? I mean, that's what we have to be talking about. We have to be looking at it from the bird's eye view, from the big scale, not just the narrow-minded focus that so many people tend to bring to conversations nowadays. We have to be looking at it in the grand scheme and the grand scope. And to do anything else is to limit our own productivity.
It's a major roadblock to oil and gas production. And so, I'm glad in this country we are embracing LNG. There doesn't seem to be a political realization that to have LNG, you have to have the NG, the natural gas. And if we are meant to cap emissions and go 36%, whatever, roughly below current levels by 2030, there is no room for more oil and gas production. We still have a carbon tax on top of that. So no, and I know this is an issue, and we're trying to get investors for the West Coast terminals, LNG Canada Phase 2, Silesum's trying to get FIDs on those. Investors in Asia who are planning to spend billions of dollars are curious about that emissions cap and how it's going to affect those projects, and there's no good answer. So if we really want to be shipping more LNG anywhere, let's start with some of those fundamentals.
Okay, so she at least has pointed to the problem, that the Liberal government is the problem, not the solution. They crafted all kinds of laws to stop the development, to stop the investment, whether it be from foreign investment or domestic investment. There's no companies that are coming into Canada with the ridiculous tax rates, the ridiculous environmental laws, and are going to sit tight while you have millions of their dollars and waiting 3, 5, 7 years. There's just no way in the world. If the Liberal government's laws weren't there right now, were out of the way, we would be looking at the amount of GDP growth that the Americans are doing, because that's what's happened. They got out of the way, and now everybody, private industry, is coming in with big fat checkbooks, and they're putting all kinds of people to work to develop or create new industries or existing industries that are no longer going to be in Canada, but now are going to be in the United States. I mean, the amount of work that Canadians could be having just trying to build our own internal infrastructure is what I'm trying to get you to understand, trying to get you to appreciate. That if the Liberal government got out of the way, then we could allow for them to build an LNG, first off the coast of BC, and then over to Churchill, where that would allow for the government to say, okay, we have some money, let's put in a shipbuilding facility in Churchill. We can use Ontario steel, Ontario aluminum, Quebec aluminum, copper, whatever it is. We can have all of the panels built in some parts of this country that can be put into the ships that are made. I mean, a shipbuilding facility employs quite a lot of people. So then houses need to go up and infrastructure happens and rapid transit goes on. Again, once that happens, we can stop moving freight on the maglev and start moving people on the maglev. So all of a sudden you're now looking at a thriving community. We then take that as a blueprint, and not necessarily for another place for LNG, but absolutely a place to build another shipyard, say Southern Ontario or anywhere that we can get connected. We can be building Navy, we can be building civilian and military ships. With the largest coastline in the world, we touch 3 oceans, Pacific, Atlantic, and Arctic. Why are we not the best shipbuilders on earth? Why? We have all of the raw material. When countries are trying to build their stuff, that build their ships, they come to Canada to buy the raw material, ship it back to their own countries or to the places that they're going to be building it, and then they build it because those other countries have better tax rates. Those other countries are trying to get people to work. So why, once the Liberal government gets out of the way, would that not be a thing that Canadians could do as their future? Not just LNG, not just fossil fuels, but also putting to work many of the domestic resources that we have, turning Canada into the greatest shipbuilding nation on earth, having the largest navy in the entire world. That's the kind of thing that we need to be looking at. That's the kind of future that we need to grasp for ourselves. And it starts with small little ideas where the Liberal government might be trying to snowball us with, oh, let's put it in Churchill. But so what? We will take their idea and we will turn it against them. We will say, okay, you want to put it in Churchill, get out of the way and watch what we can do. That's really what we need to be looking at. And that's what I don't believe that this individual, Ms. Perot from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, comprehends when I tell you or I encourage you that Churchill is one of the places that we should be developing. Because I'm looking at it in the grand scheme of things. I'm looking at it as tying in parts of the north, parts of the south. I mean, people don't realize, but Winnipeg has an enormous amount of trains that go to it from the United States of America, because of the geography, the Great Lakes and whatnot. And the train that comes out of Winnipeg takes 2 days to get to Churchill, and it's the only one. You saw the line that I pointed to. It has to pass through Saskatchewan because there's so much of the bodies of water in the way that it just simply was cheaper to go that way. Now, if we were to put down pilings, magnetic levitation, we can bring the freight we need, the raw material required to build things. I'm not talking about moving people with it. I'm talking about moving freight. I'm talking about moving food. I'm talking about moving all of the things that are required to get a port up and running. And then we dig out, blow it up or whatever it happens to be, and we can put in a shipyard. And then once we have a shipyard, we have the LNG, we have a port, houses will go up, schools will go up, hospitals will go up, people will begin to use the mass transit and so on and so forth. But it all begins with the political will of the country and getting the group like the Liberal Party out of the way. All right, I'm sure I'll have to talk about this more, but for now I'm going to wrap. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.